The wind carried grit across the canyon floor, stinging her skin as she stumbled barefoot through the wilderness. She had been left behind, cast away like some unwanted parcel, by her own family. They called her useless, too weak to keep pace, too fragile to waste food on. They tied her bundle to another's back, gave her no water, and walked away without looking back. For hours she followed faint tracks in the dirt, desperate to keep up. But the sun rose higher, merciless and blistering. By midday, her lips cracked, her head spun, and the world blurred. She collapsed against a dead mesquite tree, her breath shallow. Alone, empty, forgotten, but the mountains were never silent. From the ridge above, a pair of eyes watched her, steady, sharp, unwilling to look away. An Apache hunter, returning from checking his traps, had seen her staggering hours ago. He thought at first she was a spirit wandering, some omen left on the land. Yet her weakness was real, her fall into the dirt final. He hesitated. Strangers brought danger. To carry her into his world was to risk everything. But to leave her here was to let death take her by nightfall. His people did not abandon the dying, not even enemies. He climbed down the slope, shadows cloaking his movements until he stood before her. She barely stirred as he crouched, his shadow falling across her sunburnt face. Her eyes flickered open, dazed. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw Death himself, dark hair tied back, broad shoulders, weapons strapped to his back, his stance firm as the land itself. But Death did not speak. This man did. He knelt, touched the dry canteen at her side. It was empty. His own water skin was half full. Without hesitation, he tipped it against her lips. She drank greedily, coughing, trembling, until strength returned enough for her eyes to lock onto his. Fear flickered there, but so did something else, the spark of someone who needed to live. He studied her. Her dress was torn, the fabric of settlers, not of his people. Her hands were raw from walking. She was no warrior, no traveler. Whoever abandoned her had written her fate in dust and hunger, but now her fate was tangled with his. When she tried to rise, her legs gave out. Without a word, he lifted her onto his shoulders. She was light, weightless compared to the burden of carrying another life into his solitude. Yet he did not falter as he carried her toward the canyon where his hidden cabin stood. The wilderness howled around them, wolves in the distance, the crackle of dry brush in the wind. But for the first time in days, she was not afraid of the land. She was afraid of the man who carried her, and yet she clung to him all the same. When she awoke, it was to the smell of smoke and cedar. The sharp tang of pine resin burned faintly in the air, and her body, once trembling on hot stone, now lay against a pallet of furs. She blinked hard, unsure if this was dream or death. The dim light of a fire flickered across the cabin's walls. Timber logs sealed tight against the wind, shelves stacked with dried herbs and tools, weapons hanging like shadows above her. A cabin. Not a settler's place, no. Everything in here spoke of the Apache, careful, efficient, bound to the land. And then she saw him, the man from the canyon. He sat on the far side of the fire, sharpening a blade with steady strokes. His posture was relaxed but never careless, every movement deliberate. He hadn't looked at her yet, but she knew he was aware of her every breath. Panic surged. She tried to push herself up, but pain tore through her legs. He glanced at her then, eyes catching the firelight dark, unyielding, unreadable. "You should not move," he said, his voice low, steady as stone. Her throat tightened. Why am I here?" He set down the blade, leaned forward with his forearms on his knees. "Because if you were not, you would be bones by now." His words landed heavy. She hugged her knees to her chest, shrinking into the furs. "You should have left me." A shadow of something, irritation, maybe even disbelief, crossed his face. "I am not your kin." The reminder burned. Her kin had abandoned her. And yet this man, who should have been enemy, carried her into shelter. The unfairness of it twisted inside her chest. He moved to a clay pot simmering near the fire, ladled broth into a wooden bowl, and set it beside her. She hesitated. He gave no explanation, no encouragement, only sat back down, watching her with quiet patience, as if waiting to see what she would choose. Her hunger won. She drank, the broth warm and rich searing down her throat. Tears pricked her eyes. She hadn't realized how close she had been to starving. "Who are you?" she asked between gulps. For a long time, he said nothing, only tending the fire with a stick. Then, one who does not ask questions. Her lips parted. That was no answer at all. She wanted to demand more, but the weight of his silence was heavier than her own courage. The night deepened. Coyotes howled beyond the walls, and she shivered beneath the furs. He hadn't moved from his place by the fire. She dared a glance at him, his profile sharp in the glow, his long hair catching faint glimmers of light, his body still, controlled, like a mountain that chose when to shift. He should have terrified her. Yet instead, something else curled in her chest, unease not from fear, but from how safe she felt within these walls. She closed her eyes, forcing sleep. But even in the dark, she sensed his presence. She was not alone anymore, and that truth would not let her rest easy. By the second morning, her body ached less, though her pride burned hotter than any fever. She refused to lie weak on another's mercy. Pulling herself upright, she reached for her torn shoes and bound her feet with strips of cloth she found near the fire. The Apache warrior was outside. She could hear the scrape of an axe biting into wood. His presence was constant, like the drumbeat of the earth, and she wanted nothing more than to escape it. She pushed herself to the door. The cabin creaked open, spilling sharp sunlight across her face. There he was, stripped to his waist, muscles taut with labor as he split logs. His gaze flicked to her instantly. Not surprise, not anger, just a quiet watchfulness. "I'm leaving," she muttered, gripping the frame for balance. He leaned on the axe handle, tilting his head slightly, as though she had said something foolish. "Where will you go?" "Anywhere but here." His lips twitched, something between amusement and pity. "Walk far, then." "When the coyotes take you, remember I warned you." Her jaw clenched. She hated his calm certainty. She hated how much sense it made. Still, pride dragged her forward. Step by step, she staggered past him, into the tree line where shadows swallowed the earth. The woods closed in quickly. Branches scratched her arms, rocks bit at her feet, and the air grew damp with the promise of rain. She forced herself further, her breath ragged, every step heavier than the last. Behind her, she imagined his eyes still following, though he had not moved. By midday, she collapsed against a fallen tree. Her throat burned. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and from the distance came the sound, howls rising in the air like laughter. Coyotes. Her heart pounded. She stumbled to her feet, scanning the brush. Yellow eyes flickered between branches. 1, 2, 3. More shadows moved behind them, circling. Her hands shook as she grabbed a branch, holding it like a weapon. "Stay back," she whispered, though the words held no power. The coyotes crept closer. And then an arrow sliced through the air, embedding in the dirt between her and the lead beast. The pack scattered, yelping into the undergrowth. Silence fell heavy again. She turned. He stood just beyond the trees, bow in hand, quiver at his back. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, steady, unblinking, held her locked in place. "You test the land," he said quietly, stepping closer. "It does not forgive the weak." Shame scalded her throat. Her pride had nearly cost her life. She wanted to scream at him, to strike, to demand why he had saved her again. But all she could manage was a choked whisper. "Why do you care?" For a moment, the forest stilled, as though even the wind leaned in for his answer. "I don't," he said simply, "but the land does not need more bones." He offered no hand, no comfort, only turned and began to walk back toward the cabin. And yet, though every part of her rebelled, she followed. By the time they returned, the first drops of rain fell, spattering the roof. She sank onto the furs, body trembling from more than just exhaustion. He set his bow aside and stoked the fire, his silence wrapping around them like a wall. But silence could not hide the truth. The wilderness had spoken. Whatever bound them now was stronger than either her pride or his indifference, and neither of them could walk away. By evening, the clouds broke. The sky split with thunder, jagged light lancing the horizon as rain hammered the earth. The cabin shuddered beneath the storm's weight, but its walls held strong, trapping the two of them in close quarters. Inside, the fire snapped and hissed, shadows dancing across the logs. She sat cross-legged on a fur, arms wrapped around her knees, wet hair clinging to her cheeks. He moved with quiet efficiency, checking the shutters, laying fresh wood on the flames, ensuring nothing could breach the shelter. Every now and then, lightning flashed through the cracks, revealing the sharp lines of his face, the scars across his shoulders. She told herself she wasn't staring, but every glance lingered longer than it should. "You watch me," he said suddenly, without looking up, her breath caught. "I do not." The corner of his mouth curved, though it wasn't quite a smile. "The storm makes liars of us all." She bristled, anger quickening in her chest. "If I watch, it is because I don't trust you." His eyes flicked to hers then, dark and steady, as if weighing the truth. "Good, you shouldn't." The fire cracked louder, filling the silence. For a long while, neither spoke. The storm raged outside, but inside there was only the drumbeat of rain and the low roar of flames. She felt the weight of his presence pressing against her resolve. He did not crowd her, did not touch, but he filled the room all the same, solid, immovable, like the mountain itself. At last she broke the quiet. "You could have let the coyotes take me." He shifted, leaning back against the wall. "I could have. Then why didn't you?" He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. When he answered, his voice was low, almost swallowed by the storm. "Because I've seen enough death." The words lingered in the air, heavy, unspoken, with meaning she could not yet grasp. She studied him, how the firelight softened his harshness, how the storm seemed to respect his stillness. He was more than she had assumed, more than the enemy she had been taught to despise, and she hated herself for noticing. The thunder shook the ground. She flinched despite herself, and in that moment his gaze softened, just for an instant. He rose and pulled a heavy blanket from the wall, dropping it beside her without a word. She froze, staring at it. "Do you think I am weak?" "I think," he said, turning back toward the fire, "you are alive, and if you want to stay that way, you need warmth." She swallowed hard, fingers brushing the fabric. The gesture was simple, practical, but it felt like something else, something dangerous. As the night dragged on, she drifted toward sleep, the storm still raging outside. Her head dipped, her body weary. When she woke briefly, she saw him still sitting by the fire, bow propped against the wall, eyes half closed but alert, as if guarding not just the cabin but her. She turned away, but the thought burrowed deep. That maybe, for the first time since her exile began, she was not entirely alone. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and breathing, as if washed clean. Mist clung to the pines, and the air carried the sharp scent of wet earth. She rose early, slipping outside with a clay pot to fetch water from the stream. But when she knelt at the bank, she froze. Across the clearing, riders. 3 of them, their ponies restless in the fog. They weren't from his band. She could tell by their markings, their bearing. One held a rifle too casually, the other carried the sharp edge of hunger in his gaze. Her heart thundered. She straightened slowly, clutching the pot to her chest like a shield. Then the cabin door swung open. He stepped out, bow in hand, his dark eyes narrowing instantly. The men stiffened at the sight of him, tension rippling the clearing. "Not your land," one rider called, his voice sharp. "Not your woman." The words struck like a blow. She felt her face burn, not with shame, but with something far more dangerous, the realization of how they saw her. The Apache warrior stepped forward, rain-dark hair clinging to his shoulders. His bowstring creaked as he pulled it taut, though he hadn't yet aimed. "Leave!" The men laughed, but uneasily. The storm had softened the earth, and their horses shifted restlessly in the mud. "You take in strays now?" Another jeered. "Maybe we take her back, trade her, she'd fetch something." Her grip on the clay pot tightened until it threatened to shatter. He didn't flinch. His voice was low, steady, the kind that carried the weight of finality. "Try it." The silence that followed was heavy. The riders shifted, glanced at each other. They weren't cowards, but neither were they fools. A single man with steady hands and the fury of a storm at his back was not prey. Finally, with a curse, the leader spat in the mud. "Keep your prize, the desert will take her soon enough." They wheeled their horses, vanishing into the trees. Only when they were gone did she breathe again, her chest aching from holding it so long. She turned toward him, words tumbling to her lips. "You shouldn't have. They will tell others," he cut in, eyes still fixed on the trail. "This place is no longer safe." Her throat tightened. "Then, what will happen to me?" He finally looked at her. The answer in his eyes wasn't simple. It was layered with duty, defiance, and something unspoken that bound her to him even as he fought against it. "You stay close," he said at last. "You do as I say. If they come again, they will not find you unguarded." The pot slipped from her hands, water spilling into the mud. She hardly noticed, because for the first time she realized what he had claimed, not just to the riders, but to himself. Not your land, not your woman, yet he had stood as if both were his to defend. The days after the riders' visit were uneasy. Every snapping branch, every raven's cry in the trees felt like a warning. He had doubled his patrols, moving silently through the ridges, while she stayed close to the cabin, tending the fire, gathering what food she could. But danger never waits long. It came at dusk. She was kneeling by the hearth, coaxing flame from the coals, when the first sound reached her, a low, rolling thunder. Hooves, many of them. Her heart leapt to her throat. She ran to the doorway, only to see him sprinting up from the tree line, bow already in hand. "They've returned," he said sharply. "More of them." "How many?" she whispered. "Enough." Smoke already curled upward from the far ridge signals. They weren't just raiders, they were calling others. Her pulse hammered. "What do we do?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw worked, eyes scanning the horizon. Then, without hesitation, he strode to the back of the cabin and pulled aside a pile of brush, revealing a narrow trail that led into the thicker woods. "You take this path," he said firmly. "It leads to a cave above the river. Stay hidden there until I come." She shook her head violently. "No, you can't face them alone. You think they'll spare you if you stay?" His voice cracked like flint. "They want you because they think you are weak, but you are not. You must listen." The words burned her throat. "And if you don't return?" His gaze met hers then, steady and unflinching. In it was a promise, not of safety, but of choice. "Then you'll know I fought for you." The pounding of hooves grew louder. The shouts of men echoed through the valley. She clutched at his arm, nails biting into his skin. "Don't!" He caught her hand, holding it tight for one searing moment, as if that touch alone bound them against the world. Then he released her, shoving her toward the path. "Go!" She stumbled back, torn between terror and defiance, but the thunder of approaching riders forced her feet into motion. She vanished into the dark trees, branches whipping her face, the roar of pursuit echoing behind. From the ridge above, she looked back just once. He stood in the clearing, bow drawn, firelight from the cabin at his back, a lone figure against a tide of shadows. And then the riders burst into view, rifles flashing, voices raised in rage. The first arrow flew, cutting the night. A rider toppled. Chaos exploded. She pressed her hand to her mouth, muffling a cry as the man who had sheltered her, fed her, guarded her like flame, stood against a storm meant to crush them both. The cave waited ahead, but her heart refused to leave the battlefield behind.